We may know the Renaissance period as a time of cultural shift in the area of art, music, philosophy, science, and human thought. But do you know that this period also symbolized a shift in the Christian faith? The way people viewed God was now intermingled with the desire for societal change and mindfulness. It was all about individuality, out with the old way of doing things and in with the new. Let's take a look at the period known as the Renaissance and how it changed the face of religion, specifically Christianity, including the key figures who played a significant role in bringing about this change. The term Renaissance means rebirth. This period of enlightenment and awakening in 14th century Europe gave birth to one of the biggest movements of that period, the philosophy of humanism. What is humanism? According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the term humanism is alternately applied to a variety of Western beliefs, methods, and philosophies that place central emphasis on the human realm. Also known as Renaissance humanism, the historical program was so broadly and profoundly influential that it is one of the chief reasons why the Renaissance is viewed as a distinct historical period. Indeed, though the word Renaissance is of a more recent coinage, the fundamental idea of that period as one of renewal and reawakening is humanistic in origin. The Oxford Learner's Dictionary defined humanism as a system of thought that considers solving human problems with the help of reason is more important than religious beliefs. It emphasizes the fact that the basic nature of humans is good. The author of the book The Catholic Church, Renaissance, and Protestantism, Alfred Baudrillart, paints a clearer picture. He writes, "To raise the humanity within oneself to the highest degree of intensity, to know all, to taste all, to experience all, such is the moral law of humanism, a law that is in marvelous concord with the aspirations and lack of scruples to which the political and social condition gave rise in the Italy of the 15th century. The highest ideal is the universal man, who develops harmoniously each fine quality latent in his body and each faculty of his mind, who cultivates all the arts and sciences." So why are we discussing humanism? And more importantly, what does it have to do with the church? The rise of humanism in 14th century Italy introduced a period of change in Europe through philosophy, art, science, literature, and theology. Once believed to be a secular movement, it slowly infiltrated the church. The whole idea behind this movement was to foster individual thinking and reasoning, and to get away from the old medieval way of doing things, especially when it came to the rituals of the early church. And what were these rituals that got the movement so worked up? For starters, it probably began with the sale of indulgences. Indulgences were certificates sold by the Catholic Church, which promised to produce a person's penalty for their sins. This continued even after death, with family members of the deceased paying a fee to have the sins of their loved ones either reduced or abolished depending on the severity of their sin. These poor people had no idea that there was no forgiveness beyond the grave and was being taken advantage of by the Catholic clergy. The next was the confession of sins. Humanists believed that this was more of a ritualistic practice that lacked sincerity and overall spiritual significance and understanding. But more than anything, the humanists of the Renaissance challenged the early church's claim that only members of the clergy, priests, and scholars were the only ones who should have access to the Bible. They believed that everyone should have access to the scriptures, thereby increasing a person's personal relationship with God. With the invention of the printing press in the 1440s, the scriptures were made available to everyday people. So in a nutshell, the humanist movement sought to reform the church by removing any form of corruption that were brought on by medieval practices or rituals, removing the power out of the church and allowing people to be responsible for their own faith and relationship with God. Because of this, many members of the clergy and even certain popes held humanistic views. Popes like Pius II, Nicholas V, and Leo X were all humanists. Some key figures of the humanist Renaissance period were Francesco Petrarch, dubbed the father of humanism. He brought back or revived the classical Latin texts with major emphasis on philosophy, grammar, history, and literature. This is why humanism is also known as the study of the humanities. Next, we have Erasmus of Rotterdam, known as the Prince of the Humanists. He published a new edition of the New Testament written entirely in Greek. His reasoning for doing so was to correct any errors that were made by the Latin scripts. Then there was Johannes Gutenberg. His invention of the Gutenberg printing press in the 1440s allowed the Bible to be available to ordinary people such as you and me. Please note that earliest invention of the printing press was invented in China. Gutenberg somehow reformed it. And the most notable figure of the humanist movement was none other than Martin Luther. A member of the Catholic clergy himself, he witnessed firsthand the corruption of the Catholic Church. He openly challenged the authority and abuses of the Church by famously posting his 95 Theses on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany, thus ushering the beginning of the Protestant movement in 1517. Albeit, this list would not be complete without mentioning one of the major families of the Renaissance humanist period, the Medicis. The House of Medici, as they were known, was a prominent and powerful Florentinian family whose wealth was mostly generated through banking. And with this wealth, they were able to gain political power. The head of the family, Cosimo Medici, had an insatiable love for the arts and humanities and became the driving force behind the Renaissance humanism movement. We will learn all about the Medici family in an upcoming video. Now that we have learned all about the Renaissance and the humanist movement, you might want to believe what all the reforms made to the church, or was it in the best interest of the people? And of course, they were not bad, ruling out corruption and allowing the people to have access to the scriptures. Instead of just having it on the churches or in the monasteries, it allowed for better understanding and knowledge of the Bible. However, there is always a flip side to these things. Let's look at the negative side of the humanism as it relates to believers. And you may have guessed it, humanism, through its teachings, shifted the focus from God as the ultimate authority to human thinking and reasoning. It may not have started out that way, but when we focus on self, we lose sight of what is truly important as a believer. And such was in the case of humanism. Because of its philosophical background, it led to many questioning the legitimacy of the scriptures. Instead of what the Word of God says, emphasis was placed on human reasoning, causing a rift in the teachings. Once we get to that point, everything else becomes a what if. This is how philosophy infiltrated the church through humanism. Since members of the clergy and scholars were humanists themselves, their studies incorporated both Greek and Roman philosophies, which were rooted in paganism, which is how paganism also entered the church. But I digress. That being said, these philosophical ideas and teachings led to some of the scriptures being watered down and some entirely being rejected altogether. Some of the writings of Plato, such as his theory of metaphysics, and Aristotle's writings on natural law and ethics, were used as the basis of Christian theology. Though many of their writings were rejected due to the fact that it conflicted with the writings of the church, many still made its way into its teachings and the sermons, paving the way for many different doctrines, which ultimately did not benefit the church. Another negative effect of the Renaissance humanist period was the rise of Protestantism. Though it may not be truly negative based on your faith and how you view the Protestant movement, but one thing that can be said is that it was a side effect or byproduct of the Renaissance era. The Protestant movement gave rise to many different church denominations of which we know today, such as Anglicans, Lutherans, Adventists, Baptists, and many more. And while this may not seem altogether a bad thing, there were unforeseen circumstances. The problem with having so many different denominations is dependent on the type of teaching that is being taught. Though the foundational teachings more or less stemmed from Catholicism, many Protestant churches have revised their own teachings to match the scriptures, thus creating slightly different doctrines and religions. This is why there is so much confusion in the Christian church today. Believers are more focused on religion, which is made up of man-made doctrines and traditions, instead of the Word of God. 2 Timothy 4:3 says, For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. Sometimes change can be good if nurtured and harnessed the right way, but when pushed too far can create problems that we wish to avoid in the first place. What are your thoughts on the Renaissance, the humanist movement, and the church? Do you believe it strengthened the church or created an even greater division? This topic is very broad and requires much studying to fully understand this whole period in history and how it reshaped the church. As always, knowledge is a gift from above. You must nurture it to the fullest. See you in the next video.